Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said on Wednesday that she and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had agreed to strengthen trade collaboration, particularly in light of the tariffs from U.S. President Donald Trump, set to go into effect on August 1st.
And as countries seek other export markets, that's going to reduce the supply to U.S. markets. It's going to reduce.
Over the years, trade relations between the United States, Canada, and Mexico have undergone significant upheaval, particularly under the influence of President Donald Trump's tariff policies. The America First approach led the U.S. to impose tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico, specifically a 25% duty on steel and 10% on aluminum. The total value of affected goods was $30 billion per year for Mexico and $15 billion for Canada. Although the intended goal of these tariff policies was to protect U.S. industries and reduce the trade deficit, they had a severe negative impact on the economies of both Canada and Mexico. In response, the two countries decided to develop a new trade corridor to reduce dependence on the U.S. and help maintain stability in the global supply chain. Canada and Mexico are undertaking a strategic project worth $120 billion to build the Northern Corridor trade route. This corridor will connect the two countries via railways and seaports, creating a direct freight route that bypasses the United States entirely. Once completed in 2028, the project will handle 15 million tons of goods per year, including key exports such as steel, automobiles, agricultural products, and electronic components. The corridor is designed to reduce dependence on U.S. ports and border crossings, enabling Canada and Mexico to maintain a stable and independent supply chain. The construction of this corridor is a direct response to U.S. tariff policies, especially amid rising U.S. trade protectionism, which could restrict exports from Canada and Mexico to the U.S. The project will include a modern rail network linking Canada to Mexico through key logistical hubs. These rail lines are expected to reduce shipping times and cut logistics costs by 15–20%, especially for bulky goods like steel and industrial products. Ports such as Prince Rupert in Canada and several southern Mexican ports will play a crucial role in facilitating trade between the two countries, allowing goods to access global markets without relying on U.S. ports. The Northern Corridor project between Canada and Mexico is expected to have significant impacts on the U.S. economy. Once operational in 2028, this trade route could result in the U.S. losing up to $69 billion in annual customs revenue from transactions between Canada and Mexico. Canada has implemented a tariff rate quota, TRQ, on steel imports from countries without a free trade agreement, FTA. If the volume of imported steel exceeds the 2024 quota, these products will be subject to an additional 50% duty. Canada's steel industry, valued at $14 billion per year, plays a critical role in the national economy, especially in supplying raw materials for the automotive, construction, and machinery manufacturing sectors. Loss of cheap steel. The United States, one of the world's largest steel consumers, will no longer have easy access to cheap steel from Canada. This will force U.S. companies to seek alternative sources, potentially increasing production costs by 5–10% in the construction and machinery sectors. The U.S. automotive industry, which heavily depends on steel imports from Canada, will face challenges as rising input costs lead to higher vehicle prices by $2,000, $3,000 per car, hurting the global competitiveness of American-made vehicles. Mexico has imposed a 25% tariff on steel imports from non-FTA countries, helping to protect its domestic steel industry, which is valued at $11 billion per year and contributes significantly to exports and the national economy. Meanwhile, Mexico's automotive sector, which accounts for about 8% of its GDP, is also protected through tariffs and government support. Mexico is one of the world's largest car producers and a key player in the global automotive supply chain. The U.S. will lose access to a key supplier of affordable steel, which could result in an extra $1.52 billion per year in costs for replacement products in its construction and machinery sectors. Mexico specializes in producing low-cost vehicles and auto parts. As its auto industry remains protected, U.S. automakers such as GM and Ford will face intensifying competition, especially in the budget vehicle segment. Mexico is expected to increase auto exports, particularly to Latin America and Europe, which could erode U.S. market share globally. The U.S. auto industry may face a loss of up to 30,000 jobs by 2025 due to rising production costs and shifting manufacturing to countries like Mexico. This will directly impact key industrial states such as Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. Changes in trade relations between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, especially with the launch of the Northern Corridor trade route, will not only affect macroeconomic conditions but also have a direct impact on American workers and households. Disruptions in the supply chain, job losses, and rising living costs will be some of the most immediate challenges facing the American public. One of the most visible consequences will be the increase in the cost of living for U.S. residents. As major manufacturers like Ford, GM, and Stellantis are forced to suspend or scale back production due to part shortages, production costs will rise, leading to higher prices for consumer goods, especially automobiles and electronic components. Auto and component prices, according to forecasts by the American Automotive Manufacturers Association (AAMA. Vehicle prices are expected to rise by 5–10% in 2025, particularly for electric vehicles, due to shortages of critical components such as batteries and rare earth magnets. This may reduce vehicle affordability for many middle-income families, especially amid rising inflation. Higher prices for consumer goods. Supply chain disruptions, especially in the auto sector, will drive up transportation costs, which in turn will increase prices for food and everyday essentials. According to the Economic Policy Institute, EPI, consumers could see living costs rise by 3–5% over the next 1–2 years, placing added pressure on low- and middle-income households. The U.S. auto industry, which employs approximately 3.7 million workers, is currently facing severe shortages in key parts, forcing factories to reduce output or temporarily shut down. This has created a major shock for workers in the auto sector and related industries. To reduce dependence on the United States and ensure stability in the supply chain, Canada and Mexico have made major infrastructure investments, particularly in transportation and logistics. Canada has allocated $2.3 billion Canadian to upgrade rail infrastructure at Prince Rupert, a key port on Canada's west coast. This port is set to become a central hub for connecting Canada with Asian markets and other regions while also easing the burden on U.S. ports. This project is part of a broader strategy to develop a fast and efficient freight network. Investing in infrastructure not only lowers transportation costs but also allows Canada and Mexico to avoid trade barriers imposed by the U.S., thereby maintaining flexibility in their supply chains and protecting domestic industries. In addition, Canada and Mexico have signed comprehensive trade agreements that go beyond traditional sectors like automotive and steel, expanding into renewable energy and battery manufacturing for electric vehicles, EVs. Trade between the two countries is projected to reach $80 billion by 2026, reflecting strong growth in bilateral trade relations, strengthening cooperation in green industry and high-tech manufacturing. Both countries are especially focused on deepening cooperation in the electric vehicle, EV, and battery production industries. According to a report from the World Bank, the global EV market is expected to grow by 30% annually over the next decade. Mexico has already started to emerge as a manufacturing hub for EV components and batteries. Meanwhile, Canada, with its rich natural resources, particularly lithium, is actively integrating into the global supply chain for EVs and battery products. These new trade agreements not only present growth opportunities for both nations, but also allow them to become less reliant on U.S. suppliers, especially at a time when the U.S. auto industry is facing shortages of critical parts.